Hello and welcome to Season 6 of Business Mentorship, Keeping It Real, introducing corporate leaders who have taken the leap to business owner and celebrate their great idea in our guest blog, found on shareyourstories.online. Our guest joins us from Auckland, New Zealand. Vicki Tyler is a speaker, facilitator, and coach who teaches a unique, fearless mindset, blending corporate leadership, near-death perspective, and behavioral science as a catalyst for rapid life and career transformation. The Growzone Layer is a concept that represents that thin slice in our minds where event meets opportunity and meaningful growth occurs. Let's find out why Vicki is working with individuals who are standing on the edge. You're exactly where leadership begins. It is my pleasure to welcome and introduce everyone to Vicki.
Kia ora from New Zealand. It's a treat to be here with you. I'm really happy to be here.
I went on your website and I took a look at one of the sort of key phrases that you use. And I'm hoping that you can take this opportunity to explain to our viewing and listening audience why you mentioned you don't need more advice, you need a game plan.
Okay, this is a great place to start because I actually had a conversation with a woman this morning who is growing her business. She's moving from having had lots of really very challenging, including raids and having her business questioned at a governmental level, onto sort of helping others grow their businesses. And she's been doing coaching, very expensive coaching packages for more than a decade. And when I asked her, like, hey, what are you getting out of them that you don't have currently? What happened with her in that conversation was something that's happened to me over the last 12 months, is that we often feel that we need to continually educate ourselves about something that we actually have enough information to support and help others grow.
Right.
So sometimes there's less learning and there's more doing that's actually needed because, life is short. And if you are one of those people that is highly motivated and you just need to back yourself, and sometimes that's where the coaching is I do catalytic coaching because sometimes that's what I'm finding, honestly, having come back from 20 years in the US to New Zealand. There are extraordinary women here, but I am ripping band-aids off and shining, holding mirrors up and go, oh my gosh, like, look how amazing you are. Like, let's go.
It's almost like you don't have a business till you take your great idea and action it and make your first sale, right? So basically what you're saying is, we all have the expertise, especially if you've been in business in some way, shape, or form for 10 plus years, right? You've cut your teeth in corporate, you've built your skills, leadership skills, and now it's time to almost share that knowledge with other people, right?
Yeah, and it's interesting because anybody that's living on the planet knows that when we deal with perfectly imperfect people all the time, that when you get into a job and the higher up the totem pole you go, the more precarious it gets when business gets wobbly. Yeah. So much of the women I deal with had the same lived experience as myself, is that not when you get the big jobs, that's not necessarily when the imposter syndrome comes. It's when we lose our jobs or we have a serious, misstep, or, I was whacked from a job, and that was when I felt the imposter syndrome. So, how do we pick ourselves up by our bootstraps at that point, right, and move on to do something potentially even more significant? And I teach an ACT method, ACT. The T is for try, because trying does not require us to get it right. And trying does not actually require talent. So whatever place we are in our life or our business, we can always try.
Right. That's so true. And, give us a little bit of an indication, because I know that you're doing work both in the United States and in New Zealand. Are you finding that there are any real differences between the women that you work with stateside as opposed to the ones that you're working with in New Zealand? Or are we all the same and yet different?
Here's something that's, I have to thank you, because you actually sent me the tall poppy syndrome report, which was, I think there were 43% of those in this report or surveyed were Canadian, 34% were Americans.
Hmm.
And then there was a spattering, it dropped down to Aussies and, those of us. Now,
Right.
so thank you for the report. There was fascinating data and stats, and anybody that's listening, I'm sure we could help them look at it. Now, what I've noticed being back in New Zealand is that culturally, this tall poppy syndrome is much more significant, and it seems to be the case in Commonwealth countries. And I've done a little bit of research about that, but that's for another day. So when you have a culture that is very collectivism type culture, which in New Zealand, our Māori Indigenous, is very much a a collectivism culture. And then potentially at the other end of the spectrum, you have sort of the American culture, which is very individualistic. So, a lot of, inner work, me, what's good for me and my family and what makes me look good. And so no judgment, it's just coming at it from a very different place.
Hmm.
So when it comes to speaking up, it's a cultural issue is what I'm getting at,
For
is that
sure.
my kids started their schooling in the US where they were doing show and tell at 5. And so speaking up and speaking out is more normal. And in New Zealand, the fear of public speaking, for example, is just like, yeah, really like stick a hot needle in my eye rather than do that.
Right.
So there's a cultural thing that's going on. I would say in the US, there is there are massive issues around fear of other people's opinions. So again, there's other reasons for that. But I would say my most glaring issue is that, or glaring sort of challenge, I think, for New Zealand women is that we are women are very exceptional, like capable, and which leads to my campaign 195, which we'll get to talk about, but they hold back and they find safety in silence. Whereas American women, and I would say Canadian women, I spent 2 years in Toronto, to a lesser degree, like somewhere like closer to the American side, would be more confident in speaking up in
Right.
business.
Right. And, I think it's interesting that you mentioned the cultural differences because, regardless of the country around the world, it is still a very male dominant societies in business. I read a statistic recently that said only 30% of the 665 million global entrepreneurs are women. So that's about 252 million. And when you take a look at that, I mean, that's a global statistic. So
Yeah.
we're still finding that there are things that we have to overcome being women in business. And I think to your point, silence, there's freedom and comfort in silence because you mentioned the Poppy report. Nobody wants to put their head too far above everyone else because then you almost become a target for criticism and things of that nature. So really interesting point, I think, that we all look at speaking out and visibility from a different perspective, right?
Yes. And if I may talk about this campaign 195.
Yes, I was just going to mention. Yeah.
Yeah, this ties beautifully into it. And thank you for agreeing to be my Canadian ambassador. So campaign 195 asks the same question about leadership to a woman from every country in the world. So all 195 countries we have right now. And the
Right.
question is, why do capable women in leadership still hesitate sometimes to raise their hands and speak up?
Right.
Because at the very top, when we're talking about leading countries, it is 90% male leadership and 10% female. And, for those of us that live in democracies, democracy is all about, sharing voices and people talking and speaking up and, solving problems that are for the greater good of all. When we find safety in silence, it breaks down democracy.
For
And
sure.
women are 50% of the argument, or 50% of the planet, sorry.
Right.
So without the female perspective, this is we're going to continue the path that we're on. So particularly, I read a stat last month that said 22% of AI researchers are women. So we're going to be perpetuating this challenge which is what I do is like I talk about getting women to raise their hands and speak up and how to actually go from that place of safety and silence to do that because we
Right.
need women's voice. And my hope is to take these findings, and I do have some hypotheses and some interesting, unexpected answers. As consistent threads have been coming up. So I've added to my hypotheses based on those so far. but it's to take these to the United Nations for the betterment of women and girls. And
Right.
also, secondly, is to how do we bring men into this conversation? Because interestingly, it's proving that men are actually the problem.
Right. Right. And I think sometimes women don't support women.
Yes, and that's really harsh to hear.
Yeah.
But I think that, a lot of women, younger women I've spoken to, they don't want to stand up and be heard because they look at some of the women in their organizations who are leading really harshly and not approachable. And they've had to learn inside a male environment where, it's being tough, it's being direct, and they've been toughened up. And when they're not approachable to other women or to men in many cases, that's really, that's a challenging role modeling type scenario that a lot of our young women are experiencing.
Now, as a corporate executive in the US, and you can share with our viewing and listening audience some of the companies that you've had the privilege of leading, what leadership skill would you say at the end of that dynamic defined that experience?
Yes. So I've used a tiny little triangle that I worked out meant that I could operate despite my gender successfully. And it's all about communication. And when you communicate with respect and fearlessly, with conviction, that little trifecta, you put a bow on it and take it to the bank any day, because and the overarching is curiosity, right? So, but to speak respectfully and fearlessly, and with conviction is a way to. I won multi-million-dollar deals when I developed a real estate development business, going head to head with some big boys, and I was on my own. It was sort of like I was developing it, and in any room, it just didn't matter what gender was when I had that hat on.
Right, right. And I think that's important to mention, is that we also have to have respect for ourselves in addition to having respect for the folks that we are actually connecting with.
Yes,
Right?
1,000%. And honestly, my big aha moment happened in my early 20s. And I worked out that curiosity is the seed of everything that transformed my life from my early 20s. And the reason being is that curiosity is the shortest route to connection with another human being, because when we ask questions, then people start to lean in.
Sure.
And the women, interestingly, is also when we communicate, we do it to build community or connection, right? At the same time when we're reporting information, whereas men just communicate to report. That's why men can take 10 words to say something a woman might take 45. That we build rapport, they communicate to report. So it's really important as women to know that when we're communicating with men or our husbands, that just less is more sometimes.
Yeah, for sure. Now, you've got a successful coaching business, you're a speaker, you're working on the campaign 195. Who would you consider to be your ideal client?
Yes. It's interesting. I initially thought that it would be young women, and that's where I really want to make a difference. But I've ended up working with a lot of women who are 35 to 55. And the reason being is these are women who have often, like myself, I have two teenage sons, and I'm now ramping up my business again. So there was not a lot of what I did was I had to take a hiatus because I chose to be a stay-at-home mom, and I did pieces that I could do around that.
Sure.
And then as they've got older, so a lot of women who have had that lived experience of being a parent and possibly the caregiver, the main caregiver, and are coming back into the workplace, or their kids are getting old enough that they are like, I know I'm capable of more.
Sure.
And yet there is a fear, and it's often a fear of other people's opinions that's holding them back. So this is where the ripping off the band-aids and being a catalyst type coach is making a massive difference. Having said that, I'm starting a pilot for young women because I've had two mothers speak to me in the last 2 weeks about their daughters who are 18 to 22 who are stuck. and they don't know what to do next, and they want practical skills, and they want it to be fun, and they want some community. Because, like, think about, we're post-COVID, they missed out on a lot of sandpaper, right? A little,
Sure.
like, dealing with, yeah. So there's some work there to be done.
Now, Vicki, you've had a very successful career. You've mentioned that you took some time out to be a full-time mom, but kept your finger into the corporate world, and now you're ramping up your business. Do you have a strategic plan that you're following? Because, whenever we get to those bumps in the road and we need to reevaluate and reassess where we're going, a lot of
Mm.
the time it's a roadmap that we really need. Would you recommend to those women or business owners who are at that place where they're reevaluating the future that they actually put pen to paper and develop a strategic plan?
Yeah, 100%. I think it's working out, well, what's your goal? And for me, it's scalable and saleable. And then I back in from there, because I've used this past year to work out where I'm really having impact, and what I really enjoy, and where do they overlap, and is that monetizable? And my
Right.
ultimate goal, I do a lot of paying it forward. I've created a lot of programs, and given it away a lot while I was a parent, and parenting. My kids were much higher, needed me around a lot more. And so that's been fascinating and really interesting and super, like, learned a lot. But now I'm at a point where I want to work out, how do I make money so that for the people that can't afford what I do, I can give it away there where it will be very, very impactful. And there is a massive need all over the world for this.
One of the things that I've often talked about is the relationship between income and impact, because we do need a solid income in order to be able to strategically create the impact that we want to leave behind. In your particular case, when you've mentioned things like giving resources away or gifting things to those who may not be that far along in their journey, how important are you finding that with other female business leaders?
So just so I understand your question, like, is it important for them also to do that, to get
Correct.
paid and then to give it
Correct.
away?
Is there that common thread where high achieving women are saying, in order for me to have an impact, I also need to provide resources for those who may not be at the same place?
Okay, so this is really interesting. I'll be curious to see if you agree. In my experience, it really comes back to our lived experience, what happened to us. Give you an example of what I'm talking about, is that where we were in the USA, I was really involved in helping wherever needed, taking a very collaborative approach with the school, like, where could I make difference? And so I was very involved, and did a lot of corporate fundraising for various charities and things like that. I had neighbors that worked hard and did nothing at the school, like zero. Then when there was an opportunity to go and do things, and so as I watched our kids grow up side by side, my kids have a very pay it forward philosophy. They are lifeguards. We'd go down to Mexico to build houses. So one of my sons got involved in a can drive and helped raise like 2,000 cans they got for food for families that needed it. Like, this is just part of who we are as a family. So for families where that's not actually the normal, I think there are women in the workplace where it just doesn't occur to them. The and what I will say is that they don't, I think, unfortunately, have the privilege of understanding the value you get back when
Yes.
you pay it forward. It
Yeah.
is, you are, at our core, we want to be connected to other human beings. We
Hmm.
want to feel seen and heard and valued.
Hmm.
And yeah, so paying it forward, I will say to anybody that's listening, if you want to connect with another human being, if you're suffering from depression or confidence, or how do I make, my job it's taking me, like, it's hours and I'm working so hard, I'm not making money I'm worth, or I am making more money than I need, but I'm just feeling I'm on a little bit of an island here. Paying it forward and doing something nice for somebody else, and it could be as simple as, you're in the coffee line and you're like, you are having a good hair day, or wow, That's a good color on you. And not that sure if that's what everybody, like even little things like that. And we have that
Yeah.
moment of connection where we impact somebody's day because we can do that in seconds. We can positively impact, the science shows, another human being's day. That's what I would encourage everybody to do. But to go back to your question, and I'm curious about what you think. Unfortunately, I don't think it's the normal everywhere, but in New Zealand, I would say it's we're so small. We only have 4 million people. There's no hiding. There would be no Jerry Springer in New Zealand, put it that way. I think about it. There's nowhere to hide. So I think that paying it forward and looking after each other is much more culturally common. The bigger the population gets in a country, the more isolationist we tend to get, I believe.
Yeah, I would agree with that 100%. I think that the isolation factor becomes much more paramount when you're just one in a sea of many, and much easier for the cream to rise to the top when you're in a smaller community and you can visually see the impact that you're having on the other people that you're connecting with. But I think what's really important, and a point that you've made, is the paying it forward is an attitude. It's a lifestyle choice, and it's something that we all need to embrace if we're going to collectively make a difference on a global scale. And, it doesn't, I love your comment about just saying, you're having your hair looks great, or your outfit's wonderful, or buying somebody a coffee in the coffee line. The smallest thing can have the biggest impact. And so it's not relative to the dollar value that you're paying it forward. It's the attitude that you bring that makes
Yeah,
a
it doesn't
difference.
actually have to cost money. And
No,
I think the interesting thing is that for some of us, our time is more valuable than our money. So if you're in a position to actually donate money, I drip feed a bunch of charities. There's one called the Period Place in New Zealand where it's trying to fight period poverty.
mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm assuming mostly women listen to this, so it'll resonate that, some girls have to use toilet paper
Right.
and, UTIs and things like that. So I drip feed a little bit of what I earn and from
Mm-hmm.
every client
Mm-hmm.
to there. And I through our Surf Life Saving Club, did a weekend away with women. And I said, look, just it was grassroots costs and things. Just if you could bring along a period product and we'll donate them to them. And they were
Right.
so grateful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I
But if,
think
but if
that's
it's not money, it's time, if you've got the luxury of time,
right.
that's, even that like people that go to hospitals and their job is just to, hold babies, or you can knit booties for like kid. I mean,
Right.
it's
There's
endless
so
in the
many
world.
options. Yeah. And what I actually love is this really dovetails into the whole idea about mentorship and role modeling in our communities. Because if we don't set the example, then we're never going to be able to affect change. And I think that's really what we're talking about in various different ways, from the simplest of, kindness to be able to provide funding to specific projects. So I think that's really an important takeaway from our discussion today for sure. Now, one of the things that we do in the guest blog is we talk about 3 words of advice that we would share, perhaps with our younger self, perhaps with someone else who may be just starting out in business. And your 3 words are curiosity, connection, and empathy. So I'm going to ask you to wrap up our conversation today by giving our viewing and listening audience the reason why those 3 words are really important to you in the work that you're doing.
Yeah. So there were 6 words that changed my life forever. And they were, Mum, can you lick my face? Now, I heard these words uttered by an 18-year-old boy who was in the next bed in a spinal unit. And I
Oh,
was only a
dear.
couple of years older. I was 22. I had slipped down into the bottom of a gorge and landed on rocks about 50 feet, like a bag of potatoes. And I had cracked all sorts of bones, paralyzed for a bit, and lost my hearing. Neck was broken, pelvis was in 3 pieces.
Wow.
And I spent 3 months in a spinal unit. The guy in the next bed he and his mate were boy racers, and they had smashed their car so hard into a wall that he was immediately a quadriplegic.
Oh, dear.
So when I was like, my accident was equally as, life-threatening, but obviously it worked out okay. Well, I'm not in a wheelchair. I walked away 3 months later. I got really curious about, wow, why me? That's really lucky. But then life goes on. For anyone that's listening that's been to hospital, like life goes on when you walk away, right?
Right.
So then I got a job, my first job, and I developed a fear of heights because of this. And I decided to go down and do a bungee jump in New Zealand, in the Queenstown. And, check this off, kill or cure. I was shy, very shy. And I was not somebody raising my hand and asking questions. I felt like I would just, find out the answer later in case I was meant to know it. I didn't want to look stupid. I was that person. And I did the bungee jump. Amazing. That night, I slept walk for the first time out a second story window, and I landed in a sitting position, boom, on a concrete path, and I broke my spine again.
Oh, geez.
So that was what is going on, WTF. And I started to get kind of freaked out, trying to work out what is the message in here. Clearly there is one. And if I don't work it out, this could happen a third time and I might not be so lucky. So as I started to get more and more curious about this, my questions started turning from fear-based to, why me, to why not me? And I asked myself the question, which I like to ask people when I speak, is perhaps I'm meant for something more. Are you meant for something more? And more could be just raising your hand and speaking up in meetings in your work and contributing. Or it could be going on and, following your passion or starting a business, anything. So the neuroscience shows that in our brains, we have competing neural pathways, and curiosity, deep curiosity, and fear, they are parallel and competing for your attention. They cannot light up at the same time. So deep fear and curiosity cannot light up at the same time. If you think about it, you go into a meeting, you go to raise your hand. If you're in a deeply curious place about okay, I really want to understand why we're doing this, there's no room for fear. And then you're leaving space for courage to show up. So curiosity, as I mentioned earlier, is the shortest route to connection, which is my second C. And it's our connections with others that makes our lives really, really colorful and valuable, meaningful. And then the third is empathy. Because when you take time to ask somebody what's going on in their life, everybody has a story. Some people will say they don't, or that I'm boring, or there's nothing really going on. There's nothing to share. I beg to differ. I would like 5 minutes with you.
That's so true.
And I will find out I feel like that's a superpower, because everybody has a story to tell, even if they think they don't. And then you can have, because everyone, life is always going to be hard at times. And then when you ask people their stories and they share their little vulnerable pieces, you have empathy for them. Sharing our vulnerabilities makes us more relatable. Because when people look like they have shiny lives, that's why I've been off social media. I'm only on it now because of what I'm talking about on my Campaign 195 and trying to share my message. Because people put the shiny part of themselves on there a lot. And that's hard to relate to often. Mm-hmm. So that's my curiosity, connection, and empathy.
I absolutely love how you've connected the dots between your life experience, the work that you're trying to do, and the legacy that you're leaving behind. So I'd like to thank you very much for sharing your words of wisdom with us today and leaving us with a few things that we can think about in terms of kindness and future legacy for ourselves. So thank you so much, Vicki, for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Trish. Appreciate it.
To our viewing and listening audience, I'd like to thank you for joining us today for this edition of Keeping It Real, introducing you to the person behind the logo. If you'd like to connect with our guest, you'll find Vicki's contact information in the description portion below. I'm Trish Tonai, founder and host for the series, and we invite you to share your business story. Just visit our website at shareyourstories.online and subscribe to our channel, Business Mentorship, Keeping It Real. Vicki and I would like to thank you for tuning in, and we look forward to meeting you next time when we share another great idea.